Sit those Masi. Mr. Leon Guerrero, Ken.
For the record, my name is Ken Leon Guerrero. I'm a community advocate, have been for the past 15 years. I've been dancing with Guam Memorial Hospital since 2010 as a community advocate. I've been deeply involved in this situation since January of this year. So over the past 10 months, I've issued quite a number of FOIAs. I've initiated 3 legal actions against the governor of Guam, against the head of the Guam Memorial Hospital, and against the Guam Police Department to force compliance with these FOIAs. I've received hundreds, maybe 1,000 pages of documents on this very matter, and I've even been arrested in the process of trying to get access to the type of information that I'm putting together for you in my presentation today. Because one thing that will become clear in my presentation is the governor of Guam is lying to you and lying to the people of Guam and putting the financial future of our children and grandchildren at jeopardy. And in this presentation, I will walk through and show you the difference between fact and fiction as it comes out of Adelup. Could we start with my PowerPoint, please?
Is the PowerPoint ready? Okay, after this we have David Lotz, who's online, Maria Hernandez, David Underwood, Antonio Sablan, and Thomas Bernardo.
Well, this is going to be interesting. Okay, the people of Guam have every reason to be concerned about the construction of a new hospital because, number one, not everybody here on Guam can fly to Manila or Los Angeles. So the public hospital is the public healthcare lifeboat. That's why we, the people of Guam, need to be concerned about that. We also need to be concerned about the cost. Next slide.
My apologies. I'm being told we have to recess to reset the audio. My apologies. So we'll just stop right there.
Okay.
If we could reset that as quick as possible, please.
Ready? Committee's back from recess. Mr. Leon Guerrero, please proceed with your testimony.
Yeah, okay. In the 12 years that I've been working as a community advocate, 36,000 children have been born at GMH. Next slide. At the rate things move here on Guam, 30,000 or more children will be born at the existing GMH before a new hospital opens its doors, if it ever does. And I have reason to be wary about that. We're talking about the difference between fantasy and reality. The governor lied to us when she told us she could build a hospital in 3 or 4 years. Next slide. So I'm going to start with the Army Corps of Engineers report that was issued. And since that report is issued, there have been no studies done. Next slide. The closest thing we have is this contract from 2014 from the Matrix Group, which is a consulting firm that specializes in land use, not healthcare. They had a contract with the Hagana Restoration Committee or Authority, an IDIQ contract from 2014. And that is the basis that the governor issued a $1.8 million contract as a task order for this. So bear in mind, having the Matrix Design Group design a hospital would be the same thing as having a transmission mechanic perform brain surgery on your child. Does not compute. Next slide. There has been no stakeholder meetings. And the governor lied to us when on KUAM she told the people of Guam that we already had the charrettes, we've already had the stakeholder meetings, they're done. She lied. Next slide. When we had the interviews with the Army Corps of Engineers, they told us it would be $2 to $3 million and 18 months to 3 years to do a charrette. And here we have the governor right here in this building telling you and the people of Guam, we've already done the charrettes, we've already had the stakeholder meetings, we've already got the plan. It's nearly done. She lied. Next slide. This is the committee. These are 95% government employees. There is only 2 people in this committee in the medical community that are not government employees. One's an optometrist, one's a nurse. The rest are government employees or financial people who have a vested interest in seeing this process move forward. Nowhere in this committee are anybody from the 45 medical clinics or the 592 private practices or the dozens of medical technicians or any of the community advocates or nonprofit organizations that work with healthcare. None of these people are represented. Next slide. There is no site control. Next slide. Right now we have competing interests. We have the military looking at the possibility of reestablishing control over this site to put a missile defense platform there, which is incompatible with a hospital. And we have the possibility that the families who rightfully own that land will be getting that land back as they should. Next slide. There have been no EPA studies done, no geology studies done, and on the basis of the work required to complete an EPA study, as we saw with all the projects up there at Anderson Air Force Base and down at Naval Station, this type of EPA site clearance and geologic study takes anywhere from 2 to 3 years just to do the groundwork. So if it's going to take 2 to 3 years to do the groundwork, to analyze the land, providing that she actually gets control of the land, there's no way in hell we're going to build a hospital in 3 or 4 years. Next slide. And since we haven't done the site studies on any piece of property, we haven't done the architectural engineering drawings, which will take 2 to 3 years, as we've seen with Simon Sanchez. In fact, I think Simon Sanchez, we're going on 4 years since they gave the approval to go ahead and start doing the A&E. So if it's going to take 3 to 4 years to do, 2 to 3 years just to do the land, and 3 to 4 years just to do the A&E, that's 7 years right there. There's no way in hell we're going to build a hospital in 3 or 4 years. Next slide. So how did the Army Corps of Engineers arrive at this $817 million price tag? That's where I am really interested, because I remember a press conference right after the Corps was here, and they were talking about 150 to 200 million to renovate Government of Guam's hospital and 400 to 500 million to build a brand new one. So how did it jump from those numbers in that press conference up to 817 million? Are these numbers even grounded in reality? Next slide. Without data, you're just another person with an opinion. W. Edward Deming was a data scientist who helped bring Japan from a third world country to the second largest economy in the world in 20 years. So what he says makes sense. So what we see right now is this $817 million is based on no data. So let's look at data on what it actually costs to build a hospital about the size of the one we want to build here for Guam. Next slide. As you can see here, we have two hospitals here, one in Washington, D.C., which is a 136-bed hospital. And if you know anything about Washington, D.C., you know land there is very expensive. And in Washington, D.C. is a union town, so labor is very expensive. The government of Washington, D.C. is building a 136-bed hospital for $375 million. In Massachusetts, they're building a 150-bed hospital for $255 million. And you know, Massachusetts is not a cheap state. Next slide. Now we have another hospital in Las Vegas. They want to build a 150-bed hospital for $375 million. And up in Reno, where I used to live, they want to build a 200-bed hospital for $300 million. Next slide. And here we have a hospital in Florida. They want to build a 166-bed hospital for $326 million. And oddly enough, we have a hospital, a 136-bed hospital that was built here on Guam just a few years ago for $315 million. So where did we get that $817 million from? Next slide. It's a question of priorities. Politicians' priorities versus the people's priorities. And if we go to the next slide. One key thing that was identified in the Army Corps of Engineers report. Next slide, please. On page 30, it would cost $21 million to put in effect the key repairs identified by the Army Corps of Engineers to extend the useful life of the hospital until such time as a new hospital could be built and raise the quality of the building and its operating condition to assist in accreditation. 21 million. So what did we do with the 21 million? Next slide. Instead of investing in a Guam Memorial Hospital, we sent it to Tumon. That's what we're talking about, the question of priorities. What's more important, the people of Guam or the politicians of Guam? Next slide. Those with nothing to hide nothing. And that gets back to what I've been going through and what you as senators are going through, trying to wrap your arms around what is taking place in Adelup and at Guam Memorial Hospital and at Gita when it comes to creating a new hospital. Next slide. Adelup tells us that this plan is a secret. Why are we keeping this plan a secret? Because this is a public health care issue. Why is it secret? That's the real question here. Next slide. It's so secret that the only way I'm able to get information is I have to follow up my FOIAs to the governor's office, to Guam Memorial Hospital, and oddly enough to the Department of Public Safety, with a legal action in order to get any information. And I'm wondering, how many of you have taken the governor to court? Raise your hands, please. No? Okay, next slide. That's the only way you're going to get anything out of here. And here's a list of the documents I've gotten so far, which oddly enough, the government released to you after I took them to court. Because before I took them to court, you guys didn't have access to this stuff because it wasn't up on the Gita website. In fact, they put it up on the Gita website in compliance with my efforts. So you're welcome. Next slide. Now, I heard through the grapevine that there was a planning meeting for the new hospital. I went to Guam Memorial Hospital. I talked to the staff. I'm here for the planning meeting, the new hospital planning meeting. They tell me, oh, the new hospital planning meeting, it's not here, it's at the Hyatt. I go to the Hyatt. I'm there for an hour and a half, waiting for the events to start. And then we have a difference of opinion. Next slide. Now, the governor herself called in from Washington, D.C., to comment on my arrest. The Guam Memorial Public Relations officer told me I barged into a workshop on human resource management training, but in the arrest report, the legal counsel for Guam Memorial Hospital tells police officers that they are having a construction planning meeting. Now you see why we're all confused, because Adelup is telling us one thing, but the reality is something different, and that's going to require a higher level of due diligence on the part of our elected representatives, because we now know that the governor can't be trusted to be truthful and forthwith with the information that you need to do your jobs right. And you've got a big job ahead of you on this project, because you are the policy makers, you guys are the budget makers, and we're going to get into the details. Next slide. So we're looking at, there is no credible basis whatsoever for that $817 million. But when we look at the legislation, we're looking at between $2 and $3 billion for a building. That is after we take that $300 million and make a down payment. Think about that. We have a small population, 153,000 people, 40,000 families, 80% of those families making less than $50,000 a year. We're already balancing a $1 billion budget on their backs, and now we're going to add to that the cost of a $3 billion hospital. But we're here to talk about land and site selection, and I'm going to stick to that. We have to look at the logistical realities. Next slide. If we go out to Eagles Field, this defies all logistical common sense necessary to make public health care cost-effective and efficient. Because out here in the middle of nowhere, there is no support for this hospital. Next slide. So before we can even begin to break ground on this hospital, we have to upgrade the water and sewer system. That's going to be between $75 and $100 million just to do that, based on the current projects we have taking place. We also have to upgrade the power system, and we have to put these lines underground. And we're going to have to widen Route 15 to 4 lanes. And we're going to have to take those 4 lanes all the way up to Gigo. Plus, we're going to have to put an access road across this property by Commercial Tire Depot, so that we can eliminate that bottleneck on Route 10. We're talking $200 to $300 million of roads construction that have to take place first, so that we can actually get all the construction equipment up and down the road, and move all the parts and equipment from the commercial port up to this site that we're going to be doing all this construction in. So we're talking about $500 million into the ground before that $300 million down payment gets sent, and that $2.4 to $3 billion building gets built. Next slide. So those are wild-ass guesses that the governor's office and their committee are making, because they're making those assessments on no information. So the best site to build Guam Memorial Hospital is right here on the existing site. Now you're going to hear everybody from the administration tell you, it's impossible, we can't do that, it's only 16 acres, right? You've heard that. Well, here's Kapi'olani Women and Children. They're sitting on 4.8 acres. They're in the process of upgrading their facility right now from 250,000 square feet to 400,000 square feet. Could you back up? We're going a little fast there. Back up to the Kapi'olani. So they're going to go from a 209-bed hospital to a 253-bed hospital, but they're taking their neo-infant neonatal intensive care unit from 12,000 square feet to 50,000 square feet. And as someone who has been to Kapiolani Children, often I can tell you I appreciate the fact they're taking their parking garage from 308 to 1,600 to 1,000 stalls on 4 acres. We don't need 102 acres. Straub Clinic, downtown. I used to work next to Straub Clinic. I used to walk there all the time, so I didn't have to deal with parking. They're in the process of rebuilding their unit on 5 acres from 200,000 square feet to 760,000 square feet while running a hospital inside this facility. They're going to go from 159 beds to 260 beds, but the part that people in Hawaii will really appreciate, they're going from 400 parking stalls to 1,650 parking stalls. So there's no reason why you as policymakers should be accepting from anybody else in the government that we can't build a new GMH on the site of the existing facility. Next slide. There are other alternatives that this committee didn't look at. We have the original site right there, which is, we now know, is somewhere around 30 acres. Then we could also build on top of the elementary schools. We could relocate the elementary schools to the cliff line and build right there. So we could either build on the cliff line that's already vacant, or we could go on the elementary schools. But here's my favorite site. Next slide. The Hokoboten building, the Guam Power Authority base yard there, Hokoboten building. At one point in time, Gita was about to foreclose on them because they were so far behind on their rent that they were going to loan them $5 million so they could pay their rent, which I thought was stupid. And then we have the empty building next to it, which is the former Tropicolor. That lot right there, we could build a Guam Memorial Hospital that would rival the one that Kapiolani Women's and Children is building. We already have the roadway infrastructure in place. We have water, power, sewer in place, so we would not have to incur $500 million worth of expense. Next slide. Now we're dealing with the financial realities, and I'll just get through this part, and then we'll go to questions. Next slide. So here is the PowerPoint presentation from Gita. What we're looking at right here is $817 million, but it doesn't make any sense because Guam Memorial Hospital in 2021 generated $93 million in revenue. Expenses were $140 million, so they ran a $50 million loss. So it doesn't make any sense to spend $4 to $5 billion, and that's the number we're really talking about out on Eagles Field on an operation that loses $50 million a year. Next slide. And this is from the OPA report that shows that ever since Bill 30 was passed, government of Guam has been taking it in the shorts at Guam Memorial Hospital because basically what we've done is we've seen 30% of outpatient business move to Guam Regional, and we've seen dramatic increases in the emergency room visit as 75% of our people here on Guam have inadequate or no insurance. That is the real problem we should be solving right here because the basis, next slide, I already covered that. Next slide. Because of the way our economy is set up, most people that even have jobs don't have insurance because of the way the economy is set up. And the government of Guam health insurance is not all that great. I don't know if you guys know it, but basically, I know people that will never be able to use government of Guam insurance, so they are now using the emergency room as their health care provider. Our economy never recovered from 2008, and now we had the pandemic that slammed our economy even harder. We have war and recession coming our way. This is not the time to embark on a $5 billion project. Also, our population is declining. Our population has been declining for 20 years, and as a result of the local economic collapse. We're losing more people every day. More businesses are closing. So the government's revenue is going down, and the number of people that have health insurance is going down. This is not the environment that we build a $3 billion building on. The best thing to do is to take $21 million, make the critical repairs that we need to Guam Memorial Hospital now, and upgrade the hospital that we have now, and begin the process the way it should have been done, starting with the charrettes, determine what we really need here on Guam. We don't need to turn Guam into the medical care center of the Pacific, because we know we're not going to attract medical tourism here to this island, when they could go to Thailand, they can go to Taiwan, they go to Manila, they can go to Los Angeles. So what we're looking at here is, hold this slide right here. There is a real problem here, because what the governor is proposing to do by entering to a lease is bypass the need to come to you for the authority for funding through bonds. But I submit, $70 million a year expenditure, probably closer to $80 million a year if we include the infrastructure work, is not going to be, it's basically a tax on the people of Guam. And the people of Guam are not going to sit idly by and allow the government to enter into an $80 million a year obligation after spending $300 million, because that $80 million is going to be coming out of the general fund. Already the governor's promising to fund so many things out of Section 8 funds. It's almost like we're getting $1 billion a year in Section 8 funds sometimes. But that's not going to happen. That's not reality. The reality is we have to live within our means. And our means right now is not $80 million a year lease rent on top of $140 million a year of operating costs. That will not fly. So we have to live within our means. We have to fix the problems we have now and plan for the future. And planning for the future would be doing the things the governor said she would do, but hasn't done. Hold public meetings, stakeholder meetings, get the medical community involved, because there's no way doctors who have spent millions of dollars on their own practices and buildings and offices and homes are going to support a facility out in Mangilao. We asked them to come here. We asked them to make these investments. The time has come now for you as policymakers to support the medical experts who came here because we asked, who made the investments we asked them to make. The time has come for the policymakers of Guam to support them and keep the hospital in Tamuning, the third highest population center on Guam. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guerrero.